I stopped the car in front of a familiar one-story house with sun-bleached beige walls and an unkempt lawn. It wasn't the most impressive sight in Alturas, but it was still where I'd grown up. Glancing at the clock, it was 15 to 6, I sighed. Sunday dinner at the Parkhurst house always started at 6 sharp. Being late meant listening to my mother's 20-minute lecture on punctuality and respect. I ran a hand through my short brown hair, pulling myself together. 6 months away from my family had been a breath of fresh air, a chance for me to focus fully on my work without the constant taunts and condescending glances. The internship in Riverside turned out to be the opportunity I had been waiting for. I worked on a major project to modernize the city's wastewater treatment plant, implementing innovative filtration methods. The project was successful. My solutions were praised, and I returned to Alturas with a promotion and a significant bonus. It's that moment when life finally works out the way you planned. Except I didn't feel like sharing that joy with my family. Taking a bottle of wine from the passenger seat, I took a deep breath and got out of the car. When I passed the path with the cracked tiles my father had promised to replace 15 years ago, I knocked on the door. Voices, laughter, and the clinking of dishes came from inside. They weren't expecting me. My mother, Darcy Parkhurst, a woman of 53 with impeccably styled blonde hair and makeup too bright for a home-cooked dinner, appeared at the door. "Winslow!" she exclaimed with feigned surprise, as if she hadn't been the one to insist on this dinner all last week. "We thought you'd be late, or not coming at all." "Hi, Mom," I smiled strained, holding out the bottle of wine. How could I have missed family dinner? My mother looked at the bottle critically and pressed her lips together, clearly disappointed by my choice. "At least there's something," she sighed, stepping aside. "Come on in. Everyone's at the table." I went into the living room, which was the dining room, my mother's pride. The room was furnished with a pretension to luxury. Heavy curtains, massive furniture, a crystal chandelier bought on sale and passed off as an antique. In the middle of the room stood the dining table, already set for dinner. At the table sat his father, his sister and her husband, and his younger brother. Garrett Parkhurst, a tall, thin man with balding hair and a perpetually tired look, looked up from his plate and smiled when he saw me. "Winnie." He stood up to give me a hug. "I'm glad you're back. How was the internship?" "She'll tell you later," my mother interrupted, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Let's eat first, before it gets cold." I exchanged nods with the others. Marlowe's older sister, a blonde copy of my mother, only 25 years younger, gave me an indulgent smile. Next to her sat her husband, Dexter Jenkins, the owner of the machine shop, an overweight man with an oaky beard and an oily look. At the other end of the table was Creed's younger brother, a lanky 23-year-old with a trendy haircut and the expression of a man who thinks the world owes him something. I sat down in the empty seat next to my father and laid down some baked chicken and vegetables. "So," my mother began as everyone began to eat, "who's got news? Marlo, honey, tell everyone about your new car." Marlo straightened up immediately, ready for her big moment. "Oh, you've got to see it," she chirped excitedly. "White Mercedes, leather interior, panoramic sunroof. Dexter decided I needed something solid for commuting. And for visits to the country club," Dexter added, smiling smugly. "We're members of the Pine Hills now. We're members of Pine Hills now." "That's wonderful," Mother exclaimed, beaming with pride. "I've always said that it's not only who you are, but who others see you as." I chewed the chicken in silence, trying not to roll my eyes. I knew that Dexter's auto shop was barely afloat, and that the new car was on a loan with sky-high interest rates. But in our family, we've always valued pictures over reality. "What about you, Creed?" Mom turned to her brother. "What's your news?" Creed sipped from his glass and leaned back in his chair with an important look. "Actually, I've got big plans," he announced. "I've almost arranged with the guys to launch an online store of exclusive sneakers. We'll buy limited edition collections and resell them to collectors. The potential profit margin is hundreds of %. "Oh, that sounds very promising," the mother marveled. "My son is a businessman." Father frowned slightly. "What about your job at Johnson Electronics?" he asked. Creed brushed it off. "It's temporary, Dad. I'm not going to spend my life selling other people's TV sets. I've got big plans. I knew this was my brother's fifth big plan in the last 2 years. There was an online trading course, then an idea for a dog walking app, then a farm food delivery concept, and finally a travel blog for which Creed didn't even bother to create an account. But the family reacted with the same enthusiasm each time. Speaking of big plans, the mother intervened, changing the subject. Did you hear that the Mitchell house on Maple Street is for sale? The 2-story one with the big lot? Father clarified. That's right. The mother became even more excited. Betsy from the salon said the price was reasonable for the neighborhood. Of course, the kitchen and bathrooms need to be updated, but the location is perfect. 2 minutes to the park, 5 to the school. Why do we need a house near a school? Creed grinned. Are you planning on having a couple more kids, Mom? Don't be silly, his mother said. A good neighborhood with good schools is always resale value. That's why successful people choose such places. She glanced meaningfully at Marlo and Dexter, clearly implying that it was time to think about grandchildren. Dexter and I are thinking of moving, her sister said. Our apartment is getting a little cramped, especially now that we have a new car and so many new friends. You should definitely see the house, exclaimed the mother. I can arrange it with Betsy's agent. I suppressed a smile, looking down at my plate. If only they knew that I'd already seen the inside of this house. And not just seen the inside. What's new with you, Winslow? Mother suddenly asked, as if she'd remembered I existed. How's your, internship with the pipes? I took a sip of wine before answering. My job was designing innovative water purification systems, not with pipes. But the family ignored the distinction. The project was a success, I replied with restraint. We implemented a new filtration system that increases treatment efficiency by 30% while reducing energy costs. My flow optimization solutions have been praised, and I've been promoted to lead engineer on the project. There was silence at the table for a moment. Then Marlo snorted. So what? You're in charge of the pipes now? She laughed at her own joke. At least she's working with clean water and not mouths full of cavities, my father pointed out, trying to defend me. Dental assistant is a very respectable profession, Dad, Marlo countered. And it pays well, by the way. And I get to work with people, not just some filters. Water is the basis of life, I said quietly. What we do affects the health of the entire city. Oh God, don't start your lectures about saving the planet again. My sister rolled her eyes. When are you going to find a man and stop digging in the pipes? You're already 27, and soon all the decent options will be gone. Not everyone measures success by marriage, Marlo, I said, trying to stay calm. Of course, sweetheart, my mother interjected with fake sympathy in her voice. It's just that we're worried. Wouldn't want you to be alone with your environmental projects. And in your rented apartment, Marlo added. How long have you been living there? 4 years? 5? Almost 6, I said. 6 years of paying someone else's rent. My mother shook her head. That's a waste of money. Maybe she just likes to live modestly, Creed said with a smirk. Not everyone wants a Mercedes and a house overlooking the park. It's not about modesty, Creed, his mother said condescendingly. It's just that your sister has such a specific job. Not the most lucrative, you know. I clenched my teeth, but I didn't say anything. My salary was decent, especially after my promotion, but there was no point in dissuading my mother. There was a hierarchy of success for Darcy Parkhurst, and environmental engineers weren't one of them. Speaking of work, her mother continued, changing the subject, Garrett, tell everyone about your new boss. Mr. Barrington is a demanding but fair boss. They say he's going to reorganize the department, so we all need to perform at our best. His birthday's in 2 weeks, my mother said. And I thought it would be nice to give him a gift from the family, to show our interest in Garrett's career. She turned to us. I found a terrific gift basket, Hennessy cognac, cigars, handmade chocolate truffles, and a cashmere scarf. It's only $350, but it gives the impression of a gift for all 700. I say we chip in. That sounds great, Mom. Marlo nodded. Dexter and I are definitely in. I'm in, Creed said lazily. Just give me a couple days, okay? I gotta wait for my paycheck. My mother turned to me. That'll be $70, honey. I'm sure even with your modest salary you can afford to support your father, I wondered. Of course I could afford $70, but the very idea of giving an expensive basket to a stranger in the hope of some kind of career preference seemed ridiculous to me. Besides, all of my spare money was now being used to furnish a new house. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't right now, I finally answered. I have other financial obligations. There was a tense silence. My mother straightened in her chair, her face frozen in an expression of offended dignity. Other commitments? She repeated icily. What could be more important than your father's career? I have my own expenses, I said firmly. What expenses? Marlowe snorted. New rubber boots for climbing through the sewers? Dexter laughed out loud, almost choking on his wine. Creed grinned, too. You know, Winslow, his mother said slowly, sometimes I don't think you appreciate your family at all. We've always supported you, even when you chose this strange profession over something decent. And this is how you repay us? I'm grateful for the support, I said carefully, though I'd never really received any. But $70 for a gift for a stranger is not something I'm willing to spend money on right now. Jesus, Winnie, Marlowe sighed. It's only $70. Are you that poor? Maybe she just doesn't have enough money, her father interjected, trying to lighten the mood. Winnie just got back from her internship. She must have bills piling up. Don't defend her, Garrett, the mother interrupted. She's a grown woman, and she should know what family priorities are. She turned to me. You know, Winslow, you have to invest in your future in this life. If you continue to be so frugal, you're gonna end up poor with a job you don't understand. Not everyone can boast of relatives willing to help with their careers. I'm doing fine on my own, Mom, I said quietly but firmly. Oh, we can all see how you're doing, Marlowe said sarcastically. 6 years in a rented apartment, no car, no prospects. I have a car, I countered. You can hardly call this 10-year-old Ford a car, I snorted. It's more like scrap metal on wheels. It's reliable and economical, I shrugged. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Mother exclaimed. Reliable and economical. Your whole life is all about economy and practicality. No scope, no ambition. Do you really want to live like this? Being the poorest in the family? I felt a lump come up in my throat. I'd heard it 100 times before. I'd been compared to Marlowe, who'd married well, and Creed, who had big plans. And my own accomplishments, education, career, self-sufficiency, were never valued. I'm not poor, Mom, I said quietly. I just have different priorities. Of course, dear, my mother smiled indulgently. We all understand. Your priorities are pipes and filters. Laughter erupted around the table. I felt myself blush with anger and resentment. I put my fork and knife on my plate. Thanks for dinner, I said, getting up from the table. I have to go. You're leaving already? My mother raised her eyebrows. We hadn't even gotten to dessert. I have an early rise tomorrow, I lied. First day back at work. Of course, the pipes can't wait, Marlowe snickered, causing another wave of laughter. Dad got up. I'll walk you out, Winnie. We walked out into the hallway, and he asked quietly, Are you all right? They're not mad, they just don't understand. I'm fine, Dad. I smiled, strained. I'm used to it. Don't take it personally. He patted my shoulder awkwardly. Congratulations on your promotion. I'm proud of you. Thank you. I gave my father a quick hug and walked out onto the porch. Dusk had already fallen on the quiet street of Alturas. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air, trying to calm myself down. I walked slowly to my car, shoving my hands into the pockets of my jacket. My fingers fumbled for a bunch of keys, not to the rental apartment, but to my new house. The same house on Maple Street that my mother had talked about. I clutched the keys in my palm, feeling the metal dig into my skin. Mother was right about one thing. Sometimes you really do need to invest in your future. That's exactly what I'd done, only my family didn't know it yet. I slid the key into the lock of my rented apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building on the outskirts of Alturas. The lock clicked, and I pushed the door open, letting myself into the space that had been my home for almost 6 years. The apartment looked different now. There were boxes everywhere, neatly signed with marker. The furniture was partially disassembled, and the walls, once hung with photos and posters, now stared back at me in bare rectangles of lighter paint. I tossed my keys on the small table by the entrance and made my way to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Family dinner, as always, left behind a bitter aftertaste. I opened the window, letting in the cool evening air and the sounds of the street. In 3 days, I would be leaving this place for good, and strangely enough, I would miss it, despite the cramped quarters, the noisy upstairs neighbors, and the ever-broken boiler. This apartment had witnessed my growth from a frightened 19-year-old girl who had just left her parents' house to a confident engineer with a solid track record. I sank into the only chair I had left and let the memories flood back. I'd run away from home at 19, unable to bear the constant comparisons to the perfect Marlowe and the ridicule of my choice of profession. I found this apartment tiny, with a leaky bathroom ceiling, but my own. Paying for school and housing at the same time wasn't easy, so I took a job as a waitress at Donna's 24-hour diner. The schedule was hell, night shifts after the school day, double shifts on weekends, but it allowed me to pay the bills. At Donna's, I met Cliff Dawson, an elderly hydro engineer who stopped by every morning at 6 o'clock for breakfast before work. We struck up a conversation when he noticed me studying a hydraulics textbook in between serving customers. Cliff became my first mentor and my link to the real world of engineering. "I see a spark in you, Winnie," he told me one day when I confessed that I had chosen this path against my family's wishes. "Don't let anyone put it out." My lips stretched into a smile at the memory of Cliff. He was the one who had helped me get my first summer internship with the Altura's City Water Department when I was in my 3rd year. The work wasn't the most exciting, mostly documentation and simple calculations, but it was the first step. I glanced at the box standing in the corner of the kitchen. My diplomas, certificates, and few awards were stacked there, evidence of the path I'd traveled. My first intern salary, $580 a month, was barely enough to pay my rent. I continued to work at the diner on weekends, saving every dollar. After graduating from college, I was offered a permanent position as a junior engineer. Cliff had retired by then, but his respect in the department helped me get the job despite my lack of experience. The pay was modest, about $2,500 a month, but for me, used to surviving on a pittance, it seemed like a fortune. I remember my first major project, the reconstruction of a stormwater drainage system in the southern part of the city. I worked 12 hours a day, studying documentation, making calculations, traveling to the sites. My immediate supervisor, Val Brooks, a tough woman with 20 years of experience, looked at me skeptically at first. "Too young, too idealistic," her look said. I sighed, remembering our first encounters. Val had demanded perfect execution of every task, never forgiving mistakes or giving indulgences, but it was her strictness that made me the engineer I'd become. "If you're not satisfied with something, suggest a solution," she'd say, as she handed me back another report, scrawled in red pen. "Don't complain about the problem, fix it." Gradually, I gained her respect. After successfully completing the stormwater project, Val began assigning me more and more complex tasks. By the end of my 2nd year on the job, my salary had grown to $3,200, and I began to save money, first just in case, then with a specific purpose. By the time I was 24, I was already running my own projects and had earned a reputation as an engineer who found out-of-the-box solutions. My specialty, optimizing water treatment systems, proved to be in demand in small towns with limited budgets. I developed a methodology to modernize outdated treatment plants at minimal cost and published an article in a specialized journal. This publication was a turning point. I was noticed and began to be invited to regional conferences. At 25, I was promoted to senior engineer with a salary of $4,500. For the first time in my life, I could afford not only to pay my bills, but to think about the future. It was then that I learned about an affordable housing program for young professionals that the Altura's administration had launched to retain talent in the city. The program offered a subsidy for a down payment and a discounted mortgage, provided that the specialist worked in the city for at least 5 years after receiving the housing. This was my chance. I started saving aggressively, cutting my expenses to a minimum. No entertainment, no new clothes, just the essentials. In a year, I managed to put away almost $15,000. Not a bad amount, but not enough for even the minimum payment for a decent house. And then came the opportunity for a 6-month internship in Riverside, with a double salary and a bonus at the end of the project. I accepted without hesitation, even though it meant moving temporarily and living away from my familiar surroundings. In Riverside, I was working on a project to modernize the city's wastewater treatment plant, a massive undertaking with a multi-million-dollar budget. The team consisted of 10 engineers, and as an optimization specialist, I was tasked with designing a filtration system. For the first time, I was given almost unlimited resources and freedom of action. I pushed the memories aside and looked at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. I'd have to get up early tomorrow, my first day back at work. But the thoughts kept flowing. At Riverside, I'd met Lainey Cortez, an energetic woman in her 40s who headed up the project. Lainey became not just a supervisor but a true mentor to me. She saw my commitment to saving every penny and one day invited me to lunch to talk. "Winnie, I see how hard you're working," she said then. "But remember to live in the now, not just save for the future." I told her about the affordable housing program and my dream of owning my own home. Lainey listened and then asked a question that got me thinking. "What then? When you have this house, what will change?" I didn't have an answer right away. The house was a symbol of independence, proof of success. But Lainey meant more than that. "Don't let your desire to prove something to others overshadow what's important to you," she advised. Believe me, I've been through it. That conversation changed my approach. I was still saving money, but I stopped denying myself small pleasures. Dinner with colleagues, going to the movies, a new book, and in a strange way, it made me happier and more productive. The Riverside project was completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 12% under budget. My filtration system proved to be a key factor in this success. At the final meeting, Lainey announced a bonus for the entire team and singled out my contribution. The award amounted to $8,000, a significant sum that brought me closer to my goal. When I returned to Alturas with a letter of recommendation from Lainey, I was promoted to lead engineer at a salary of $6,000. Along with savings and a bonus, I now had enough to qualify for the affordable housing program. I got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the Alturas at night. Somewhere out there, in a nice neighborhood not far from the park, stood my future home. The house my mother had talked about at dinner, considering it an unaffordable luxury for ordinary people like me. I'd heard about the Mitchell's house being for sale before I'd even left for Riverside. I had seen it from the outside a few times as I drove by, but never thought I could buy it. Back in Alturas, I decided to just take a look, for curiosity's sake. I called the agent and set up a viewing. The house was exactly as I had dreamed, spacious, with high ceilings, large windows, and a cozy porch. It needed repairs, just as my mother had said, but the foundation was solid. 2 bedrooms, a study, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen opening onto a small garden, more than enough for me alone. The price was higher than I had bargained for, but still within the realm of possibility given the subsidy. I decided to take a chance and applied for the program. 2 weeks of nervous waiting, collecting endless documents, checking credit history, and finally, approval. I received a subsidy of 20% of the value of the house and a mortgage at 4.5% interest for 25 years. The deal was finalized a week before I returned from Riverside. I became the owner of a house on Maple Street, the very house my mother considered the symbol of success. I was reminded of her words over dinner. "A good neighborhood with good schools is always valuable for resale. That's why successful people choose those places." Successful people. Had I finally become one of them by her standards? And did it matter to me? I stepped away from the window and picked up my phone, scrolling through the photos of the house I'd taken during the tour. A spacious living room with a bay window, a kitchen with an island in the middle, a cozy master bedroom with its own bathroom. The house was in need of updating, but it was already many times better than where I grew up. What would my family say when they found out? Would they believe that I'd gotten this far through my own hard work without a lucky marriage or dubious business plans? Would my mother finally recognize that my obscure job with the pipes had brought me success? These thoughts swirled in my head as I got ready for bed. Tomorrow was the first day of work in my new position, and I wanted to be in shape. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind was swarming with home improvement plans, lists of necessary purchases, budget calculations for renovations, and I couldn't let go of the memories of tonight's dinner. Marlowe's condescending glances, my mother's dismissive comments, her assurance that I'd stay poor. Their view of my life was so far removed from reality that it became almost laughable. They saw only what they wanted to see. A poor relative with an unprestigious job, a lonely loser who couldn't afford a decent car or her own place. They were never interested in my real accomplishments, my professional development, the respect I had earned among my coworkers. At the Alturas Water Department, I was valued. My opinion was taken into account when planning the budget for new projects. Val Brooks, who once doubted my abilities, now called me her right-hand woman and promoted me to her position upon her retirement in a few years. "You have something you can't buy, Winnie," she told me before I left for Riverside. Engineering flair and tenacity. It's a rare combination. I smiled as I remembered those words. Val was stingy with her praise, and her recognition meant more to me than any formal awards. Morning came all too quickly. I woke to the ringing of my alarm clock, feeling not quite rested but determined. A quick shower, a cup of strong coffee, and I was ready for a new day. On my way to work, I drove past a house on Maple Street, my house. It looked quiet and a little abandoned with pale blue walls and an unkept garden. But in a few days, I would be moving there, and everything would change. I imagined sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise, working in the study overlooking the garden, hosting guests in the spacious living room. Guests. The thought of inviting the family came spontaneously. What if we had a housewarming party? Not telling them the house is mine, just inviting them over for dinner, visiting a friend, and then show them the deed. Would that be petty? Maybe. The desire to prove something, the need for recognition, isn't that what Lainey warned me against? But on the other hand, it would be a way of finally dotting the I's and dotting the T's, of showing my worth in deed and not in words. And maybe change the dynamic of our relationship. I got a warm welcome at the department. Val introduced me to everyone as the hero of the Riverside project and announced my promotion. Colleagues applauded, and someone brought a cake to celebrate. I felt embarrassed by the attention, but at the same time grateful for the recognition. "We're not letting you go, Parkhurst." Val jokingly wagged her finger at me. "You're our chief modernization expert now." The rest of the day was spent in meetings and familiarization with current projects. I was assigned to lead the water system upgrade in the northern part of the city, a complex project with a limited budget, just what I specialized in. By evening, on my way home, I had made a decision. I'll have a family dinner at my new house this weekend once I move in. I won't tell them the house is mine. I'll let them think we're going to visit one of my coworkers. And then I'll show them the truth. It won't be an act of revenge, but a way to start a new chapter in our relationship, without condescension or ridicule, as equals. And if they can't accept me as I am, even with my own house, well, that will be their choice, not mine. I parked in front of my house, still a rental apartment, and dialed my mother's number as I walked up the stairs. "Mom? It's Winnie. I wanted to invite you all over for dinner this weekend. Yeah, my friend's place. You'll love it. Write down the address, 27 Maple Street." Saturday, 6 p.m. I stood in the middle of my new living room, looking at the result of 3 days of intensive work. The basic furniture was already arranged, the curtains hung, the kitchen equipped with everything I needed. The house didn't look fully settled yet. Some unpacked boxes stood somewhere. Unhung paintings leaned against the wall in the corner of the hallway, and the bedroom floor was still carpeted. But in general, the space already looked cozy and, most importantly, mine. The move had not been easy. I took 2 days off work, hired a small truck, and moved my belongings from my rented apartment. I didn't have much furniture. Years of saving money had taught me to do with the minimum. I had to buy the essentials: a dining table, a sofa, and bookshelves. I chose simple but quality things that would last a long time. The clock read 4 in the afternoon. It was 2 hours before my family arrived, and I still had a lot to do. In the kitchen, the meat and vegetables were in the oven, the pie dough was waiting for its turn, and the white wine was chilling in the refrigerator. I wanted everything to be perfect, not for show, but to fully savor the moment. My nerves were on edge. I replayed the upcoming conversation in my head, imagining the family's different reactions. My mother would probably be shocked, my sister jealous, my brother confused. And the father? What would he say? For the first time in a long time, I actually worried about what my family would think. I dusted off the mantelpiece, adjusted the flowers in the vase, the little touches that make a house a home. The windows in the living room looked out onto a neat green lawn bordered by lilac bushes. Beyond them, the playground of the park her mother had spoken of was visible. The perfect location, as she put it. The doorbell rang, and I shuddered in surprise. Had they really arrived early? I hurried to open and found an elderly woman on the doorstep with a basket covered with a plaid towel. "Good afternoon, dear," she smiled. "I'm Eleanor Higgins. I live across the street. I noticed we had a new neighbor, so I thought I'd drop by and say hello. I hope I'm not intruding." "No, no, no, no." I opened the door wider. "I'm Winnie Parkhurst. Very nice to meet you. Come in, please." Eleanor turned out to be a chatty but pleasant woman who had lived on Maple Street for over 30 years. She brought homemade muffins, a tradition of welcoming new neighbors, and asked me with interest about my work. To my surprise, not only did she not wrinkle her nose at the mention of the wastewater treatment plant, but she showed genuine interest. "Oh, how wonderful!" she exclaimed. "My late husband Harold was a civil engineer, always saying that infrastructure is the unsung heroes of our civilization. Most people don't even think about where the clean water in their taps comes from." I couldn't help but smile at such enthusiasm. Eleanor was the first person outside my professional circle who didn't find my work boring or strange. When she left, with a final offer to contact her with any questions about the neighborhood, I felt a sudden surge of confidence. If the first introduction to the neighbors went so well, perhaps a family dinner wouldn't be a disaster either. I went back to preparing, glancing at my watch periodically. I set the table, arranged the candles, checked the oven. When everything was ready, I changed into a simple but elegant navy blue dress and applied light makeup. When I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, I barely recognized myself, not because of the changes, but because of the expression on my face. For the first time in a long time, I looked truly confident. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. I went to the window and saw Marlowe's Mercedes, with my parents' car parked behind it. The family had arrived in full force. I took a deep breath, gathering my composure, and went to answer the door. Without waiting for the bell to ring, I stepped out onto the porch. The looks on my family's faces when they saw me at the front door of the Maple Street house were worth every penny spent on the house. "Winnie?" my mother said, halfway to the door. "What are you doing here? Where's your friend?" "Good evening, everyone," I smiled, trying to look calm, though my heart was racing. "Come in, please." "But—" My mother looked at the front of the house, still not understanding. Marlowe squinted. "You work here? Did your friend hire you to organize the dinner?" I barely held back a chuckle. "No, Marlowe. Just come on in and I'll explain everything inside." They walked slowly toward the porch, exchanging perplexed glances. Dad seemed puzzled. Creed seemed frankly intrigued, and Dexter just looked around with an appraiser's expression on his face. When everyone was in the hallway, I closed the door behind them and offered, "Let me give you a little tour and then we'll have dinner. Everything is already ready." "But where is the master of the house?" Mother asked insistently. "You said we were going to visit your friend." "Patience, Mother." I smiled and gestured for them to follow me. I led them through the living room with high ceilings and large windows, showed them the dining room where the table was set, the kitchen with new appliances, a study with bookshelves, 2 bedrooms and a cozy veranda overlooking the garden. As I walked through the house, the expression on my relatives' faces changed from bewilderment to admiration. What a marvelous house. My mother couldn't help herself when we returned to the living room. "Your friend must be a very wealthy man. And where is he?" Marlowe added with ill-concealed interest. "You never introduced us." "Is he late?" Dexter asked, keeping his eyes on the crystal chandelier, obviously calculating its value. I motioned for everyone to take a seat on the couch and chairs around the coffee table. "Let's have a glass of wine before we sit down at the table," I said, pouring the drink into glasses. "In the meantime, I'll answer your questions." When everyone had gotten their glasses, I sat down in the chair across from them and said, "I've invited you here today to celebrate my housewarming." There was silence for a moment. Then the mother laughed. "Oh, you found a new apartment? And your friend let you have a party at his house? How nice of him." "No, Mom." I shook my head. "You don't understand. This is my house. I bought it." The silence became deafening. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from disbelief to shock. "What do you mean you bought it?" Marlo was the first to realize it. "You can't afford a house like this." Instead of answering, I stood up, walked over to the secretary in the corner of the room, and pulled out a folder of papers. When I returned to the table, I opened it and placed the purchase agreement with my name in the buyer column in front of my relatives. "3 days ago, I finalized the deal," I said calmly. "The house on Maple Street belongs to me now." Dad was the first to take the deed and scrutinize it. His eyebrows rose and a look of astonished respect appeared on his face. He silently handed the papers to his mother, who snatched them eagerly. Is this the Mitchell house?" She shifted her gaze from the papers to me and back again. "But how? Where did you get that kind of money?" "I work, Mom," I said simply. "I've been working for 8 years. And contrary to what you think, my obscure job pays well, especially after my promotion." "But even with a good paycheck, you couldn't have saved up for a house like this," Marlo exclaimed, snatching the papers from her mother. "It's got to be at least $300,000. $285,000 to be exact," I corrected. "And no, I hadn't saved all of it. I participated in the city program of affordable housing for young professionals. I received a subsidy for a down payment and a favorable mortgage." "So you are still in debt," Marlo exclaimed in triumph. "I knew it. I'm no more in debt than you are with your Mercedes," I countered calmly. "The only difference is that my house will only increase in value over time, and your car will lose value. And my monthly payments are less than a quarter of my paycheck, so I can afford it." Marlo blushed and looked away. Dexter looked at me with renewed interest, as if he'd just discovered I existed. "But why did you have to hide it?" Creed asked, still stunned. "Why didn't you tell us before?" I shrugged. "Have any of you asked about my business, about my career, about my plans?" I looked around at them. "In the last few years, all I've heard from you is mockery of my profession, lamentations about my poverty, and hints that I'm worthless without a husband." "We were just worried about you," the mother objected weakly. No, Mother," I said softly but firmly. "You weren't worried. You were judging. You were comparing me to your idea of success. And because I didn't fit into that framework, you decided I was a failure." There was silence. Father coughed. "You're right, Winnie. I've been unfair to you. I didn't see what you'd really accomplished." His confession surprised me. I didn't expect either of them to admit they were wrong. "Thank you, Dad," I said quietly. "It means a lot to me." My mother straightened up, her face contorted into a dignified expression. "I don't understand why you had to put on such a show. If you wanted to show off your house, you could have just invited us to the housewarming party." "It's not about bragging, Mom." I looked her straight in the eye. "It's about respect. I wanted you to see reality, not your idea of me. I'm not the poor loser you thought I was. I'm an engineer with a good career, my own home, and plans for the future." "And now what?" Marlo asked sharply. "You expect us to admire you just because you bought a house?" "No," I shook my head. "I don't expect admiration. But I deserve respect. The same respect I show you even when I don't agree with your decisions." Creed, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke. "You know, I always thought your job was boring. Well, the pipes, the filters, doesn't sound very exciting. But it seems to be giving you what you need, and that's cool, actually." I smiled at my brother. He was the youngest in the family, spoiled but not hopeless. "Thanks, Creed. Actually, my job is a lot more interesting than it sounds. I don't just dig through pipes, as Marlo put it. I design systems that provide clean water to entire neighborhoods. It's a creative process that requires engineering thinking and problem-solving skills. Sounds complicated, Creed admitted. Sometimes it is, I nodded. But it's what I like to do, and as you can see, it can be quite lucrative. Dexter, who had been mostly silent up to that point, suddenly perked up. This affordable housing program? Is it available to everyone? Only for professionals in fields that the city prioritizes, I explained. Engineers, teachers, doctors, some other professions, and you have to have worked in Alturas for at least 3 years. I see, he grimaced, obviously figuring that a car mechanic was unlikely to fall into that category. My mother, meanwhile, was digesting the information. I saw her eyes struggling with contradictory feelings, pride in her daughter, who was able to buy a house in a prestigious neighborhood, and irritation that this daughter did not correspond to her ideas about the right way to success. "Well," she finally said with a strained smile, "congratulations on your purchase. The house is really very nice. The kitchen definitely needs updating, though, and the bathrooms are clearly outdated. Typical mom, can't just be happy for me. You have to be sure to find faults. But I choose to ignore it." "Thank you, Mom. I plan to gradually renovate everything. I'll start with the kitchen as soon as I've saved enough." "We can help," my father suddenly offered. "I have a little experience in remodeling, and Creed's pretty good at assembling furniture." "I'd love to help," I smiled, genuinely touched by his offer. "I can help with the design," Marlowe stepped in, not wanting to be left out. "I have great taste, everyone recognizes that." "We'll see," I said diplomatically, not wanting to reject her offer, but not wanting to turn my house into a copy of her bland apartment. "Well," I stood up, "I think it's time for dinner. I hope you're hungry." I led them into the dining room, where the table was set with simple, elegant white tablecloths, good dishes, candles and silver candlesticks that I had found at an antique store for a surprisingly modest sum. "Very classy," my mother admitted, looking at the table settings. "I didn't expect you to have such taste, Winslow." "There are many things you didn't expect of me, Mother," I said softly, inviting everyone to sit down. The dinner was tense. The conversation didn't flow, and there were occasional awkward pauses. My mother continued to look at every detail of the interior with a critical expression on her face. Marlowe couldn't refrain from making sarcastic comments. "So you're a homeowner now," she said, sipping her wine. "What, you think you're better than us now?" "No, Marlowe." I put my fork down calmly. "I've never considered myself better or worse than anyone. I'm just living my life." "But you obviously set this whole thing up to shock us," she continued. "Admit it, you like to see our surprised faces." I sighed. "I wanted you to see me as I am, not as you imagined me to be. That's all." "You're probably up to your eyeballs in debt," Marlowe threw in. "This house is too expensive for your paycheck." "I already explained about the affordable housing program," I repeated patiently. "I got a down payment subsidy and a low-interest mortgage. My monthly payments are well within the range of my salary as a lead engineer. I've planned everything carefully." "And yet," my mother intervened, "how are you going to maintain a house like this on your own? You need a man to help with the repairs, with the garden." "I'll manage, Mother," I said firmly. "I'm not afraid of work. And if I have to, I'll hire specialists. You don't have to get married to fix a leaky faucet." "You've always been so independent," my mother shook her head. "Too independent for your own good." "I'm not trying to impress you or anyone else," I said calmly. "I'm just living my life and doing what I love and what's good for me. If that's not good enough for you, that's your problem, not mine." My words hung in the air. Mother pressed her lips together but remained silent. Father looked thoughtful, and Creed nodded approvingly. After dinner, we returned to the living room for coffee and dessert. The conversation returned to the subject of the house and my ability to maintain it. "Do you have any idea how much property taxes will cost in this neighborhood?" my mother asked. "What about insurance? What about heating?" "Yes, Mom, I've done the math," I replied, remaining calm. "I have a financial plan that includes all these expenses, plus a contingency reserve." "But how will you manage on your own?" she persisted. "A house this big requires constant upkeep." I can handle it, I repeated firmly. I'm not afraid of difficulties. Mother wanted to add something, but my father suddenly interrupted her. I think Winnie has proven that she can handle adversity. Let's just be happy for her. Her mother gave him a surprised look, but remained silent. There was an awkward silence in the room. Well, Marlowe said finally, rising, we should probably get going. Dexter has to be up early tomorrow. Yeah, and so do we, her mother said, clearly relieved to get away. Thanks for dinner, Winslow. The house, really impressive. I walked them to the door, exchanging formal farewells. Mother kissed me on the cheek, but her smile didn't touch my eyes. Marlowe limited herself to a nod. My father shook my hand, holding it for a moment longer than usual, and said quietly, I'm proud of you, Winnie. Creed hugged me awkwardly and whispered, Cool house, sis. It's really cool. When everyone left, I closed the door and leaned my back against it, exhaling with relief. The evening had been even more stressful than I'd expected. My family's reactions were predictable: distrust, jealousy, attempts to downplay my accomplishment. But despite this, I felt a strange satisfaction. I had finally shown them the truth about myself, and now they knew I wasn't the poor Winnie they thought I was. I walked through my quiet house, turning off the lights and picking up the dishes. My house. Even the mental repetition of those words filled me with quiet joy. It wasn't just a building with a roof and walls. It was a space where I could be myself, where I didn't have to conform to anyone else's expectations or make excuses for my choices. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the veranda with a cup of herbal tea. The night air was cool and crisp, the stars shining brightly over the quiet neighborhood. I thought about the words I had said to my family today. I'm not trying to impress you or anyone else. I'm just living my life and doing what I love and what makes me feel good. If that's not good enough for you, that's your problem, not mine. For the first time in a long time, I really believed in those words. I had reached a point where I no longer needed to prove my worth, not to my family or anyone else. I knew who I was and what I was worth, and that was enough. A month later, I threw a real housewarming party. This time, I invited those who were truly a part of my life. Colleagues from the department, including Val, who came with a bottle of fine whiskey and gardening tips, a few old friends from college, my first mentor from Donna's Diner, who admired every corner of the house, and, to my surprise, my father and Creed, who seemed to be starting to see me in a new light. Mother and Marlowe ignored the invitations, citing some event at the country club. I didn't insist. Some relationships can't be fixed, and sometimes it's better to let go of those who aren't capable of enjoying your happiness. The party was the complete opposite of the tense family dinner. The house was filled with laughter, sincere congratulations, and plans for the future. Val and my father, to my surprise, found common ground discussing the features of old houses and ways to modernize them. Creed chatted enthusiastically with my colleagues, showing interest in something other than his unrealistic business plans for the first time. Looking at these people gathered in my house, I realized that I had finally found my way. Not the one my family had prescribed for me, but my own. And on this path, I was surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was. The house on Maple Street became more than just a place where I lived. It became a symbol of my independence, my achievements, and my right to choose my own life. And no family prejudices could change that.